Thanks to GIBS for having me. Fernando, thank you for the invite, and of course, thank you to all of you for your time. If you ever wanted to experience what imposter syndrome really feels like, then you should be standing here at the #1 business school on the African continent, being introduced as a master of strategy execution, which surprised even myself, and then have in the audience a number of my past and current colleagues who can at any given point in time stand up and call BS on what I'm talking about. So I do not at all consider myself to be a master in strategy execution. I think that you should talk to Fernando about that. I'm simply going to share with you some of my lived experiences. The results of one turned out pretty well. The other one, the verdict is still out. We're still quite early in that journey. The reason I brought this with me now, for the colleagues who have worked with me for a long time, this will look very familiar to you, because you'll know that you've never ever been in a meeting with me without me bringing this into the room. I see Fernando is laughing. And if you want to really get into my bad books, you should touch this book. We got to a point where I said, don't touch me on my folder. Okay, please stay away from this. So this folder, firstly, has sentimental value to me. So you probably won't be able to see it on the screen necessarily. It has my name on it. And then the pen, which is the only fancy pen I've ever had in my life, and the only pen I've never lost in my life, was a gift that a team of mine, when I left that specific business 10 years ago, gave me as we came to an end of a strategic journey. And this was given to me by my boss as we started a strategic journey. Inside this, and there is a point to the story, by the way, inside this are two books. I am a Moleskine fan. The first one is my diary, obviously not my corporate diary, not my online diary. And in here, you'll find at any given point in time my monthly priorities. You may be surprised at how few there are, but we'll get to that. Because if this page was full, you wouldn't be executing, right? And then kind of urgent to-dos. So that's what's on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is something that's quite new, and some people in this room got a book like this a while back. It's also personalized, also got my name on it. It is something that I shared with the Altron leadership team as we started on this journey that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. It contains the history of the business. It contains our strategy. It contains sort of where we're coming from and where we intend to go. And I use this book as my thinking, if that makes any sense. I've got the sort of planning book. This is the thinking book. So if I were to use Fernando's analogies, I think this is strategy definition, and that is around strategy execution. Now, why do I tell you this? Is because in this are a couple of points that I'm going to be talking about over the next, I think I've got about 30 minutes, which is, firstly, strategy is personal. Right? It's quite personal. I mean, two of these artifacts has got my name on it, and there's a specific reason why the books that I handed out to my team, I wrote their names on it. It's personal. Execution and strategy is personal. Secondly, the reason why not only because they're quite useful, it's a very nice folder and a very nice pen. The reason why I carry this with me is also because I think you have to remember and take time out sometimes to have a bit of fun and reflect on where you are. Because otherwise, I think, like your friend Peter, I think he's probably at the top of Kilimanjaro already thinking about the next mountain that he's going to scale. And I think you should probably just take a moment before or after the selfie just to enjoy and reflect and enjoy the journey. And then obviously the books really talk about the fact that the part about strategy execution they never talk to you about is the discipline, the prioritization, the writing that down, starting your week, and your cadence might be different. It might be 5 o'clock on a Monday morning. It might be Sunday evening. It might be Monday morning first thing. Going back, having a look at what your priorities are, and making sure that your week reflects your priorities. Because you can either let life run away with you. I mean, I think your example of Mike's life clearly runs away from him. Or you can make sure, within reasonable boundaries, because SHIT happens, that you really, really are focused on what it is that you are trying to that you are trying to achieve. So the cool part about strategy and about being a CEO. So as I was doing my MBA, unfortunately not GIBS, couldn't quite afford that yet at that time in my life, or you go to some business school, or you dream about, or you have the ambition to become a CEO. This part is the part that everybody is keen on. And what is everybody's favorite subject, by the way, in an MBA? It's strategy. I don't know about you, but for me it was. Because this is what you want to do. This is the CEO game, right? I mean, you go to some luxurious wine farm or a business school, facilitation, some team building sessions, you do some market analytics, and you start talking about what the opportunities is in your business. You get marketing to put a super cool slide together, to make it look really good and inspiring, and you pat yourself on the back, and you've arrived. You are now a CEO. You now have, because that's what everybody asks you, right? When you're the CEO, and particularly when you're new, when you come into the job, people want to know what is your strategy. There's a famous, it's a bit dated now, but I think the story is still valid, book called Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? I don't know who ever read it, the IBM turnaround story under Low Gassner. He was the first outsider to run IBM, I think in about 40 or 50 years when the company's fortunes were significantly declining. And he said the number one thing that he got asked for in the first 6 to 12 months as CEO is, what is your strategy? And his response was, IBM does not need a strategy at this point in time. It needs a plan. But this is the cool part, right? So now you're flying. Now you're the man or the woman. You've now got a strategy. The hard part is now you've got to execute on the strategy. Right. Now you've got to get to the top of Kilimanjaro, take a selfie, enjoy the moment, and more importantly, start again the next day. Right. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about some of my experience of how you manage to get that done. The first thing is I am astonished at how many people come up with solutions before they've even debated what the problem is. It is the most amazing thing I have ever seen in my life. Picture the strategy session. We're in the cradle somewhere, or we're in some wine estate in Stellenbosch or Franschhoek, and we're talking about the strategy. And what is the problem or the opportunity? And the HR director says, we have to invest in our people. That's what we've got to do. And the marketing director says, guys, we've got to invest in the market. We've got to upsell. We've got to up our marketing budget. Right? The production manager says, folks, we have got to invest in our production infrastructure. We need more lines. We need to get our productive output up. That's going to lead to more sales. That's going to lead to more revenue. The finance director says, we've got to stop spending money. Got to stop spending money, guys. This is crazy. Cut CapEx, get the balance sheet healthy. But astonishingly, no one has ever stood back and said, but what is it that we're trying to achieve here? What is the opportunity or the challenge? And my two kind of experiences in that is, number one, start with the numbers. The numbers don't lie, right? I mean, opinions are like fancy SUVs in this part of Joburg. Everybody has one. But numbers don't lie. So start with the numbers. Do an analysis, and what I would also certainly encourage is, nobody has to be the CEO, right? If you're new in your role, what I told my team, I'm now 40 months into the role, so I'm not new anymore. Use the opportunity to look at things from a fresh perspective. And hold up a mirror and do it with numbers, right? Because the challenge is now, this strategy is now mine. Now I'm defending it. I'm not analyzing it anymore. But numbers, curiously enough, don't tell you everything you want to know. You also have to gather, I think, insights. And I'll come a little bit later to culture. You also have to get, I know it always sounds slightly terrible when I say this, but I call it the smell of a place. What makes the people tick? Why are they here? Why do customers do business with you? Why don't they do business with you? What is it that partners in your supply chain like about you? What is it that they don't like about you? So gather insights. Talk to people. The process that we went through at Altron, for example, is roughly interviewing, in some cases quite formally, and in some cases informally, around 600 odd people to get a little bit of a sense of why are they here, what are they trying to do, what do they like, what don't they like. And now, of course, comes the hard part. Because now you've got to start breaking this up into smaller chunks, right? But you got the strategy, it looks great, marketing's done a fantastic job. Now you have to start assigning tasks and priorities to this. And by the way, whenever I show this slide to people, they say, seriously, is that it? You guys spent 6 months saying that the journey to improve profitability or shareholder returns is growing revenue, managing your costs better. Is that is that it? Right, there's some cool stuff around data and AI that we're doing. And the reason why I put this slide up is because the best strategy is a simple strategy. And I would submit, and Fernando is the expert, and I'm sure there are many folks at GIBS that can tell you the statistics better than I can, that I would reckon 90% of strategies are pretty much the same. Because if you're in a given industry, you only have so many options available to you, right? You know, if you're in retail, if you're in mining, if you're in banking, maybe mining is slightly different. In retail and in banking, you are literally competing for wallet share, right? There are some people that have come up with strategies that have fundamentally created, transformed industries, right? Microsoft, when MS-DOS came out onto IBM PCs, it created the era of the personal computing and kind of changed the world, right? Subsequent to that, and I'll come back a little bit later to Garmin, Apple. And by the way, I don't think Apple revolutionized the industry when they did the Mac. I think it was the iPhone that was their big. And I don't know if you remember the Steve Jobs launch, where he spoke about email, internet, instant messaging, and people thought he spoke about 3 devices, and they had a slideshow where it turned into one, and the audience was gasping. Killed. You remember them? Research in Motion, who remembers them? BlackBerry, killed them. Great movie out about that, by the way. I watched it on the plane the other day. Right? So I think there are transformative strategies, but I think most of the time, 90% of strategies are by and large the same. We're all still just coming off the high now about the Springboks winning the World Cup. Do you think, besides maybe the second-tier nations, do you think any of the top 6 ranked countries came to the World Cup with a strategy that was not to win it? Do you think any of them sat in a team room one day and said, guys, let's finish third in the World Cup? Do you think that was their strategy? Do you think their game plan, do you think the 3 things that they came up with was necessarily dramatically different? I don't think it really was. So who gets to win? What is the secret sauce? That's the execution part that we always talk about. So you've got to start prioritizing, right? But then, and this is, thanks Fernando for stealing my analogy, but I'm going to sort of go down there in any case, because I was going to use the example of, I think you touched on a marathon. If you decide to run a marathon, and you decide to run it in a certain time. So now you've got a strategy, right? You've got a goal. Not a strategy, but a goal. I want to run this marathon. You mentioned all of that. You've done the logistics. You've done a bit of a plan. You've looked at the route mapping. You've looked at your nutrition. So you've got a plan. You've got some priorities, etc., etc., etc. But now, what is the difference between Mike and Peter? There's a couple of things. Measurements is a key thing, right? And, to go on to my running analogy. Garmin, by the way, another great strategy story, right? This is a company that started providing navigation equipment for boats and cars. Then Google and Apple came along and said, we'll see your navigation capability and we'll give it to people for free. And then they had to reinvent themselves. And today, I could be lying to you, but I think they ship the 4th most smartwatches in the world. They completely reinvented themselves. So what you've got to do now is you've got to make sure that you have measurements. And I think you called it cues on that roadmap. Right. And what's also great, and this is what I particularly like about the strategy map framework, is if you can have a framework that's pre-established already, 80% of your work, of the hard work is done already, right? Now the difference between business and a race is a race is run by one person. Yeah, you're competing against other person, but only you running that race. In business, depending on which company you're in, 4,000 people or 10,000 people are running that race with you. How do they know what the route map is? How do they know where the stations are? How do they know that they're on time? if they don't have a running watch. I don't know if any of you have ever run. Have you ever seen a route marker? There are people running that you have to follow. That's called leadership. And also, what this slide is really about is what's also quite important is as things get more complicated, is to have alignment. Right? So really make sure that people understand what the measurements are all about so that they can personalize that for themselves and for their teams. And then I think it's also important, if we take a step back, we've got our strategy, we've now broken it up into, simpler plans. We build a framework for that, we want to measure it, and I'll come back to cadence later. But we also want to build some timelines here, right? We really want to make sure, because we're not just going to run this first race. In fact, maybe that marathon, you mentioned 2 oceans, maybe it's the route to 2 oceans, or comrades. There's a further goal. So for me, I think it's also quite important that you do prioritization against different timeframes. And all that this really illustrates is, and by the way, this is not sequential. I don't know if you're familiar. Again, I didn't make it up. I believe in copying to catch up, the horizon 1, 2, 3 sort of timeframes. This is not necessarily sequential. It is an indication of different timeframes in your strategic journey. But the way you look at it, or certainly I look at it, is when I look at my monthly plan, which is actually in there, I decide that 70% of it is allocated into these short-term goals. What am I trying to achieve? And that's by and large this year, right? 20% is what is it that we're trying to achieve in year 2 and year 3 on this journey. And 10% typically, what is it that I have to do now, this week, to achieve what I want to achieve 5 years from now? Because otherwise you're going to run out of road, right? Okay, so that's great. So now you've got all these priorities. I'm not going to belabor the point of priorities, because all that this really tells us is then go and take those priorities, and that then becomes very short-term focused. Right? So you have very, very clear, specific priorities. Because my team make fun of me about 2 things I always say in meetings. One is, I hear you, which is my way of saying I disagree with what you're saying. I hear you. I got that from my wife. I hear you, darling, she says. And the second one is, I say, don't kick the can down the road. I've seen so many people say, we have got a 3-year plan. We are going to achieve that goal. It's, if we go back to our marathon, weight loss program, quitting smoking, I always say to people, Monday is the best day of the week. I mean, how incredible a person are you going to be on Monday? We love kicking the can down the road. So this is all about saying, no, but let's be very clear about what our priorities are right now. Okay, so that's great. Now we've done some harder work, right? We've got all these goals, we've aligned people, we've got measurements, we know we're going to have weekly, monthly, quarterly check-ins around this. Now, again, did most of the teams at the World Cup have that? I'm pretty sure they did. I'm pretty sure they had very clear plans. In fact, I was fortunate enough to be at the quarterfinals. Let me tell you, the most distraught thing about the Irish and the French were that they hadn't planned their logistics ahead, because they were planning to go to the next game, not home. Right? I'm not being funny, because it could have happened to the winning quarterfinals as well. I'm just saying they had a plan. What makes, they would have trained as hard, right? They would have had a professional approach to training. They would have had nutritionists. They would have had the Garmin watch. They would have had the VO-Maxes. They would have had the measurements. What is that one little bit extra? And this is a famous quote. I'm sure you've heard it. I'm not very original, as you can see, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. There's only one difference. I disagree with this quote, and I have my own quote, which I then found on the internet and realized, but I stole that from somebody else as well. But I really thought I made this up. As I always say, culture does not eat strategy for breakfast. It eats it for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner. And then it takes a little Chardonnay, dots it down, and then maybe has a little grappa afterwards, and then has culture for dessert, and strategy for dessert. You've got to get the culture part right. That intangible part. And if, like all of us, if you've read all the sort of LinkedIn messages, posts, the decomposition of the Springbok World Cup victory, I think that's the one thing that became apparent, right? Is that there is this intangible And how does a team do what they manage to do, besides basically give all of us coronary failure 3 weekends in a row? How do you do that? What is that something extra? Now, I can't tell you what that is in your team or for you personally, but for me, it's somewhere in that intersection. I just think you have to put the time in to find it. So like some of my lived experience in gathering info, that's why I spoke about try and get to the essence of what it is. And by the way, this is where people can't go from one team to another team, one country to another country, one business to another business, and just say, let me just take what worked here and use it there. Sure, maybe the framework might work. That's a good thing. But you can't go tell a New Zealander that giving South Africa hope will inspire them to greater performance. Okay? You've got to live there. You've got to get into the essence of it. You've got to understand what it is, because people will get tired. Cadence is a tiring thing, right? Discipline, you spoke about that. No one wants to wake up. No one wants to wake up in the middle. I mean, I remember that well. That's why I stopped running. 4:30 in June in Johannesburg. It's horrible. And you can only look at that training plan and the watch, and then the Strava that your running mates are going to be watching. Yeah, those are all motivators. And I mentioned that earlier, right? Alignment, cadence, discipline, because it's a powerful thing, right? I mean, one of the reasons in business why we have cadence, why we have business reviews is, there is an element of social pressure in that, isn't there? Like Strava, like Facebook. There's an element of social pressure in that. Why do people tell their friends that they are running the comrades? Besides bragging, it's to hold themselves accountable, right? I must say, I would never do that. I'm glad that sort of tech wasn't available the last time I ran a race, because there's nothing more stressful than that live tracking. Can you imagine that? I can see there must be people in this room that have run the comrades, right? So I think you really got to get that part right, is really understand, and there's no formula for that. It's different for different people, but I think an acknowledgement and an understanding that, and I don't want to call it cold and clinical, but the nice PowerPoint, the inspirational strategy, and then the hard yards of cadence and discipline will only get you so far. Remember, when you're competing against those other companies that are trying to get the same, that is by and large got the same strategy as you, that by and large are fighting for the same wallet share, whatever it might be, the intangible is going to be that culture piece, that purpose piece. What is it that make people want to go the extra mile? So I'm fascinated by customer service. Fascinated by it. I love it when I get great customer service. I think I'm a good customer when people give me good customer service. I know I'm a terrible customer when people give me bad customer service. And I always give return business to people, and I always recommend people that give me good customer service. Have you ever walked into a place? It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a retailer, a motor dealership, whatever it may be. There's a good coffee franchise. I love Cappuccino, which is a great example for me of that. I'm not going to mention their name, where the attitude is just incredible. Right? Haven't you seen it? And people know you. I'm like amazed at how do they know? Like the third time I get there, they walk in and they go, okay, hey, Mama's not here today. Okay, cool. We'll get you. You're the one with this morning they said to me, you're the one with the real milk, right? Mama drinks the almond milk, and there's just a buzz about it. And then, you often have the opposite sort of experience where, you're going to somebody saying, please, man, if it's just not too much of a bother, if you could stop talking to your colleague and just, please, you could have said, so I wonder about that a lot, trying to get into that sort of the DNA and what is it? What is it that makes, what makes it different? And the answer is, as I said, there's no formula to it, but it's kind of culture, it's leadership, it's purpose, it's treating people in a certain way. That's kind of the secret. That's kind of the secret sauce for me. And then, of course, in this perfect world of strategy execution, where we're disciplined, we've looked at the numbers, we've gathered the info, we've got the plan, we've got the measurements in place. Now we're even using fancy machine learning and AI to automate all of this. The problem is things go wrong. That's the problem. That's the thing they never talk to you about, is the curveball or two. I mean, in our case, we had two businesses that really started to run into some into some challenges, and that's where you've just got to roll with the punches. There's no book. There's no book for that. And I think the biggest risk that people run, and I said this to someone the other day again about sports and coaching, is when you start losing, when do you change the plan? Or when do you say, but we're just not executing well enough on the plan? Or when is it a culture issue? Or when is it a combination of all of that? And I think that's when most people's nerve really gets tested, right? And I really, really hate saying this, but a fantastic example of that, for those of you that just watched the Cricket World Cup with the Australians, I hate saying this. I hate saying it. But things went wrong for them in the beginning. People were writing them off after the third game, and then they stuck to their guns. They trusted their process. They trusted their culture, that they know how to do this. They've been in this situation before. So I think I'm just about on time to wrap up. Just some of, as I said, my lived, past, and current experience of executing on strategy that by and large gets you the results that you want to, is that strategy is the easy part. I want to be clear, this does not mean there's not an important part. Just to be clear, strategy definition is a very important part. And as I said, particularly if you're new, use that newness. Take people that have knowledge of the institutional knowledge is the word I was looking for, but use that newness. And remember, numbers don't lie. Prioritization, measurement, cadence, discipline. There is no other way around it. It's just, it is what it is. A marathon is not going to run itself. You're not going to run a sub-4 or I can't remember what the comrades' goal is. I think the sub-10, whatever the cutoff is for the medal. It's not going to run itself on you planning to do it. You have to put in the hard yards, but you have to know, because putting in the hard yards, unfortunately, isn't enough either. You have to know whether the hard yards are quick enough. Is it making progress, right? Because if I'm on a training run for 20 weeks consecutively, 4 times a week, on each occasion running at the time slower than what the analysis tells me I need to run, I'm not going to be successful. I'm not going to be successful either. Prioritize. And then if it's more than one person, make sure that you align. That's why I said in the beginning, remember when I mentioned about you may be surprised at how few things there are. Because if your monthly to-do list, I think there's roughly 25 lines. If you had a monthly to-do list of 25 things, do you really think you could achieve that in a month? It's like when you do these New Year's resolutions, right? next year. So the next year is better than Monday. The 1st of January is even better. There's like 52 Mondays all wrapped into one, because then you are going to be a better father, husband, lose 10 kilograms, have your best golf handicap for the year, and run the next marathon, and go on that bucket list trip to Machu Picchu, right? Next year. It's not possible. Right? It's just not possible. You have to prioritize. Culture is a differentiator. I'll tell you a practical example. As I said, I ran 2 marathons. I was really privileged that the second one I ran was the New York Marathon. I ran it with a friend of mine whose name, astonishingly, is Peter. True story. He might be listening in today. And the first marathon, so I'd never run a marathon before, and funnily enough, you mentioned nutrition. I got the nutrition wrong. I didn't understand that part. I did all the training, and then about 5 kilometers before the end, I thought somebody had shot me in the leg. I literally couldn't move anymore. And he basically dragged me across the finish line. I could not have done it without him. Couldn't have done it without culture. We ran New York. I'm looking strong. I've put in the hard yards with about 15 kilometers to go. He says, listen, you keep on going. You are running the race of your life here. I can't keep up. I turned to him, I said, do you think we flew halfway around the world? For us, what is the point of not going across the finish line? and having the photo, which I still have today in my study of the two of us together, you need people, a shared purpose and culture to help get you across the line. And then you just got to roll with the punches sometimes. Things happen. When I ran that marathon, we'd planned it perfectly. People had spoken to me about you must understand that you leave the hotel at 6 a.m, and if you're not a professional, you only run at 1 p.m, and it takes 2 hours to get there. So we were well prepared for that. And then the day before we ran, they switched daylight savings time. And I don't know how I did it. I got the watch thing wrong. So my whole sort of planning of waking up at a certain point in time, I woke up to the phone call saying, "Where are you?" The bus is about to leave. Things go wrong. Roll with it, readjust, trust the process, make that call, stick to it.